My fiancé said, "If you can't handle my friend's jokes, just pay and leave." So I stood up, took my keys, and walked out. Good evening, my beautiful queen flowers. Before tonight's story, let us bow our hearts before the Lord. Heavenly Father, thank you for every queen flower watching right now. Thank you for her strength in weakness, her love in emptiness, and every silent sacrifice you alone have seen. You know her pain, her tears, and the battles she fought quietly. Lord, remind her tonight she is not forgotten. She is chosen, seen, and deeply loved by you. Remove every fear and doubt and fill her heart with your truth. She is worthy, she is enough, and she is beautifully created in your image. Father, heal every broken heart. Restore her peace, renew her strength, and replace her fear with courage. Where she feels lost, bring direction. Where she feels weak, be her power. Remind her she does not need to chase love or prove her value. Her worth comes from you. You are her protector, her provider, and her unshakable source. Lord, guide her steps, open doors no one can close, and bless her home and family. In waiting, give her patience. In storms, give her peace. Tonight, we declare healing, restoration, and victory over her life. Thank you for never leaving her and for the new beginnings ahead. May every queen flower rise strong, fearless, and full of faith, knowing she is your beloved daughter. In the mighty name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. I decorated that room myself. Every stem, every candle trimmed low so it warmed the brick instead of washing it out. 9 hours on a rented ladder, wiring eucalyptus along steel beams 100 years old. The foundry room used to make iron. Tonight, it was making an announcement, and the announcement was me. You outdid yourself. Beckett came up behind me, kissed the top of my head. My father's going to pretend he isn't impressed. He'll be impressed. I don't need him impressed. I need you happy. I'm the happiest man in this room. I believe that completely. Write that down first, before anything else. I believed it the way you believe a floor is solid. You don't test it. You just walk. I'd spent the afternoon at the shop before the party, hands full of amaryllis, telling Nessa I was nervous in the good way. The way you're nervous before something you've wanted for a long time finally arrives. She'd hugged me flower-dusted and laughing and told me I looked like a woman who already knew how her own story ended. I believed her too. 60 people filled the room by 8. Corrigan Development didn't do small. Josephine worked the crowd in blue silk. Randall held court by the bar like the bar reported to him. I wore green because Beckett said I always smelled like flowers, even when there weren't any around. I'd been in rooms like this before, not as the guest of honor, as the vendor mostly, the woman who shows up at 6 to set the tables and leaves before the toasts start. The night felt like walking through a door I'd only ever delivered packages to. I noted every face that recognized me from some other event, some other job, and watched them recalculate in real time. Florist, fiancé. The math never quite settled for some of them. He walked me through the room like I was something he'd built. Introduced me to a developer named Foster, who asked, before he asked my name, if I'd done the Highland Park wedding that made the society page last spring. I had. His eyebrows moved half an inch, recalculating. Then he smiled the smile people give you once they've decided you're useful instead of deciding you belong. She's being modest, Beckett said, arm warm around my waist. Best in the city. Everyone here's about to find that out. I leaned into him. Whatever came after, I want that on the record. I had that. A councilwoman who'd known Randall for 30 years stopped me near the dessert table, complimented the eucalyptus, asked how long I'd been doing this work. 11 years, I told her. She said that explained it. Nothing this precise comes from talent alone. It comes from repetition, from doing a thing badly enough times that you finally get to do it well. I liked her for that. I wish I'd gotten her name. Chip Halloran found me at the bar around 9, a glass of brown liquor already doing most of the talking for him. There she is. Woman who tamed Beckett Corrigan. He grinned at the table. You know, he used to bring home strays. A three-legged dog freshman year. Some guy from a gas station sophomore year who slept on our couch for a month. Guess this one just cleans up nicer. A few people laughed. Not everyone, enough. I kept my face still. 11 years running a business teaches you that. How to hold a room's temperature without letting it show on your own skin. Chips had 4 of those. Beckett said, laughing it off, squeezing my hand under the table, squeezing my hand. Not saying anything else. First thing I should have counted. Josephine caught my eye once, early in the night from across the room. She raised her glass to me, small, private, like a woman passing a note in a language only the two of us spoke. I held on to that small gesture longer than I should have. It felt like proof I wasn't imagining the good in this family. Deacon added his contribution a minute later, gesturing at the eucalyptus with his glass. And she does her own flowers. Saves you a fortune, man. Smart move marrying the help. That one landed. I felt it land in the room before I felt it land in me. I don't work for Beckett, I said even, almost warm. I did this because I love him. There's a difference between the help and a gift. Course. Deacon was already bored, already onto someone else's drink. I told myself it was nothing. Men like this had been doing this routine since prep school. Beckett had warned me once, over wine in my apartment. They razz everybody. It's how they say they like you. I'd let it roll off me before. I waited for his hand to find mine again. The private signal. I see you, I've got you. It didn't come. Chip stood for the toast Randall had asked him to give, and my stomach folded before he said a word. I already knew, the way you know a storm has turned toward your house before the sky goes green. He raised his glass. Looked around the table first, building the moment, the way men like Chip always build a moment before they knock it down. To Beckett, who finally found someone who can arrange a room as well as she can rearrange his whole future. Some men marry up, some men marry pretty. Beckett here found a woman who does both jobs for free. Thinner laughter this time. More people looking at their plates than at me. Nobody at that head table put their glass down and said, "That isn't funny." I sat there for 1 full second, doing the math I'd been doing all night without admitting it to myself. 60 guests, 1 toast. 0 seconds of Beckett standing up before I did. I thought about every small thing I'd let slide in 18 months because the big things had always felt so solid. The math didn't add up anymore, and I was done pretending it did. I stood. Not dramatically. The way you stand when you've decided something, that's enough. Quiet, steady, meant. Beckett's jaw tightened. He looked at his father, that same asking look, and something in his face closed like a shop pulling its gate down for the night. "If you can't handle my friend's jokes," he said low, apologetic in tone and not in a single word, "just pay and leave." For a second I didn't understand him. Pay for what? Pay who? Then I understood exactly, because I was the one who'd insisted on covering the flowers myself instead of letting Josephine's planner order wholesale. I wanted the night to have something of mine in it that wasn't bought. He took the one thing I gave freely and turned it into a bill I apparently still owed. I looked at him a long moment, long enough that the table went quiet, that Josephine's hand rose toward her throat, that Chip's mouth finally closed. "I built this room with my own hands tonight," I said. "I've spent 11 years building myself the same way. I don't owe anyone at this table a receipt for either one." Nobody moved. A glass touched a table too hard somewhere behind me, rang out like a small bell. I found my keys by feel, the way you find your own front door in the dark. I walked out of the foundry room past 60 people who had just watched the man I was supposed to marry hand me a bill for my own dignity and ask me to settle it with an audience. Nobody followed. Not Beckett. Josephine half rose from her chair. I caught that much before the door swung shut. Outside, October cold hit like a slap, and I let it. Stood on Smallman Street a second, breathing it in, needing something my body wasn't going to name for me yet. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my coat until they stopped. I wasn't giving Smallman Street a woman falling apart in green silk. Not tonight. I got in the car. My phone was already lit up on the passenger seat. Nessa, probably, or my mother, someone who'd hear this before I even got the key in the ignition. I didn't touch it. Before I pulled away, I looked back once through the tall windows of the room I'd spent 9 hours building. Randall Corrigan was still at the bar, not watching the door I'd gone through, not watching his son, frozen at the head table like a man who'd just understood what he'd done and had no idea how to undo it. He was watching the whole scene with the calm, settled look of a man watching something go exactly according to plan. Chapter 2. Everything Before. I didn't cry until the Fort Pitt Bridge. Something about that tunnel. The city disappears, then explodes back into view all at once, lit windows stacked up the hillsides like the whole town is watching you arrive. I'd driven that stretch 100 times with Beckett's hand on my knee, both of us quiet, because the view did the talking. Tonight I drove it alone. The tears came so fast I had to pull into a gas station and just sit there, hands on the wheel, engine running. Until I could see straight, Nessa called 4 times before I picked up. "I'm coming to get you," before I'd even said hello. Someone at the party had texted someone who'd texted her. That's how this city works, small enough to pretend it's big. I'm okay to drive. I didn't ask if you were okay to drive. I asked where you are. I told her my mother's. Home meant an apartment Beckett had a key to, and I couldn't stomach him letting himself in tonight with a bottle of wine and a version of events where this was somehow smaller than it was. Nessa didn't argue. She'd cover the shop in the morning. Then quieter, "You did nothing wrong tonight, Addie. I need you to hear that before you fall asleep." I hung up and drove to the Hill District with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. My mother didn't ask questions. One look at me, green silk mascara halfway down my face, and she pulled me inside, sat me at her kitchen table, put the kettle on. Vashti Redmond has never once believed a crisis couldn't wait for tea. "Beckett Corrigan," she said, setting the cup down, "told you to pay and leave." I hadn't given her the exact words. 30 years of reading rooms for a living will do that to a woman. 20 of them hunched over a sewing machine altering gowns for people who didn't always remember to say thank you. She can hear a story's true shape from 3 sentences of someone crying in her kitchen, in front of everyone, I said. She didn't say "I told you so," though she'd had her doubts about the Corrigans from the start. Doubts she'd mostly kept to herself because she raised me to make my own mistakes. She just held my hand until my shoulders stopped shaking. "Your grandmother used to say some folks will let you build the whole house and then argue with you over who owns the porch. Beckett's not like that." I stopped. Heard myself use the past tense for the first time. "Wasn't like that. I don't know what he's like anymore." "Then find out, slowly, on your terms. Not tonight, and not because he shows up here begging, because he will show up here begging, Adeline. Men like that always do once the room's empty and the audience is gone." She squeezed my hand once, hard. "You don't owe anybody an answer just because they're finally ready to ask the right question. How do I know when I'm ready? You won't at first. You'll just notice one day that you stopped flinching at his name. That's the only clock that matters here." She got up, rinsed her cup, set it in the drying rack the way she'd done every night of my childhood. "Stay in your old room tonight. I'll leave the porch light on, same as always." I sat with that a long time after she went to bed. Tea gone cold, and somewhere in the quiet, I let myself think about how we got here. Because you can't understand how badly a floor gives out without remembering how solid it felt the day you first stood on it. March, 18 months ago. A Tuesday. Beckett Corrigan walked into Thistle and Vine like a man who'd never once bought his own flowers. Needed something for a groundbreaking. Photographs, well, doesn't look like it's trying to. Restoration job, he said. A row of townhouses in Lawrenceville his family's firm had bought before anyone believed the neighborhood was worth saving. You believed it was worth saving. I grew up watching my grandfather tear buildings down. I'd rather spend my life putting them back together. I liked that answer more than I meant to. Built him dogwood and hellebore that looked like it had grown there instead of been delivered. He came back 3 days later to report the groundbreaking went well. Came back the week after that with no excuse at all, just to see me, and admitted it standing at my counter with his hands in his pockets like a teenager. Nessa had watched the whole thing from the cooler doorway, mouthing something at me behind his back that I didn't need to lip read to understand. 4 months before he asked me to dinner properly. 2 more before I stopped assuming a Corrigan dating a florist from the Hill District was a phase. He never once made me feel like an experiment. Asked about my father, dead of a heart attack when I was 19, left my mother alone with a mortgage and a sewing machine. Listened like the answer mattered specifically to him. Not a box on the way to somewhere else. We were slow, deliberately, painfully slow. The kind of slow I'd chosen after watching too many women hand themselves to men who hadn't earned the weight of them. 18 months of dinners and arguments about nothing, and him showing up at 6 in the morning to carry buckets he didn't need to carry. 7 months in, I got a fever bad enough to close the shop during wedding season. Called him half delirious to cancel dinner. He showed up anyway. Not for dinner. With soup, ginger ale, the crackers my mother used to buy. Sat on my apartment floor reading me invoices I was too sick to process, sorting vendor orders into piles so nothing slipped through. Didn't touch me. Didn't try to. Stayed until my fever broke on the second night, asleep sitting up in my one armchair. When I woke him at 3 in the morning and told him to go home and sleep in an actual bed, he looked personally offended by the offer. I said I'd stay, he told me, half asleep, like that settled something. I meant it. That was the morning I stopped waiting for the other shoe. 4 months ago, Mount Washington, the whole city glittering below us like something poured out just for the occasion. He got down on one knee. No speech prepared. He fumbled the ring box, dropped it once in the grass, laughed at himself before he even asked the question. I didn't hesitate for a second. By then, I trusted him the way you trust the ground. I trusted his family less. Randall looked at me like a line item he hadn't approved. Josephine was warmer but careful warm, a woman who'd learned long ago not to spend it all in one place. Only Beckett ever made me feel like the math didn't matter. Like I wasn't a variable he was still solving for. Tonight, I wasn't sure that was true anymore. I slept in my old bedroom, a bed too small for a grown woman, and drove back to the shop before Nessa arrived, because sitting still felt more dangerous than working. Unpacked the tote I'd carried to the party, floral wire, spare shears, the invoice folder I'd needed for the caterer, laid it all out item by item. A small ritual that usually settled me. There was a folder in the bag that wasn't mine, plain manila, unlabeled, thicker than my invoice folder. The kind that gets grabbed by mistake in a room full of catering carts and gift bags and 60 people's coats. I almost set it aside unopened. Some better version of me almost didn't look, but my name was on the top page. Not typed, handwritten, in the margin in ink I recognized, because I'd watched that same hand sign a lease with me 4 months ago. I sat down slowly, folder open in front of me, and started to read. Chapter 3, The Folder. The first page was a cover letter. Law firm downtown, the one Beckett had pointed out once, laughing, calling it the most expensive address in Pittsburgh for people who wanted to feel important. Addressed to Randall Corrigan. Dated the Monday before the party. I ran my thumb over the letterhead like touching it might change what it said. The paper was heavier than anything I stocked in my own shop. The kind of stock that costs money specifically. So the person holding it understands the weight. Before they've read a single word, I read the second page 3 times. Before the language stopped sliding off my brain and started meaning something. An amendment to the Corrigan Family Trust. Dense. With terms like contingent interest and vesting condition, but underneath the language, one sentence plain enough for anyone. Full partnership, contingent on strategic alignment through marriage. A name attached 2 paragraphs down, a family called Ashcombe, developers out of Cleveland. A merger Randall had been chasing for over a year through every angle except the direct one, until somebody decided the fastest route ran through his son's wedding ring. Further down, plainer still, the kind of sentence someone wanted understood without room for argument. absent strategic alignment as defined herein. Beneficiaries' voting shares shall revert to the trust, and beneficiaries' role shall be limited to that of salaried employee at the discretion of the managing trustee. No law degree needed. Marry the right family, or spend your career answering to your father with no ownership of anything you built. The document was dated 4 days before the engagement party. I sat very still, the overhead light humming the way it did when the shop got quiet enough to hear it, and made myself keep reading instead of screaming. Screaming wouldn't tell me anything. I needed to understand exactly how deep this went. A 3rd page. A printed email forwarded, no message body. Just a chain, someone at the law firm to Randall, Randall to Beckett, subject line, time sensitive. Please advise by Friday. And in the margin, blue ink, the handwriting I'd watched sign our lease 4 months ago, handle before Friday. The party had been on a Friday. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the light outside went from grey to dark. Long enough that Nessa texted twice about lunch, and I never answered. I got up at some point, walked the length of the shop, touched things because my hands needed a job that wasn't shaking, the cold steel of the work table, the rough twine on the spool by the register. 3 months ago, in the walk-in, Nessa had asked me quietly whether I'd noticed Randall never use my name. Always she. Never Addie, like naming me made the arrangement more permanent than he wanted. I'd told her she was reading too much into an old man's manners. I'd wanted the good version of this family so badly, I talked myself out of every small warning before it became a large one. I thought, too, about the wedding dress fitting 6 weeks ago, when Josephine had shown up unannounced, with a seamstress I hadn't hired, and a comment about how some brides photograph better in ivory than white, delivered. So lightly I'd laughed along, instead of asking what she meant by it. I thought about the venue deposit Randall's assistant had paid, without asking me which room I preferred. I thought about the engagement photos, how the photographer Josephine had booked kept angling me a half step behind Beckett in every frame, and how I'd chalked it up to composition instead of what it probably was. Small things. A dozen small things I'd filed under family being family instead of what they actually were. A family already deciding, quietly, how this would go, with or without my vote in the matter. I hadn't been wrong to want the good version of this family. I'd just been wrong about what the wanting would cost. He'd known. Not suspected. Known in writing 4 days before the party that his father wanted this handled. And he'd walked into that room and let his best friend do the ugly work of ending it, so he wouldn't have to say one true thing to my face. My phone rang at 7. Beckett Corrigan. His photo still there from a hiking trip in June, both of us sunburned at the top of some overlook, whose name I couldn't remember right now if my life depended on it. There was a version of me that wanted to answer. The one who'd fallen asleep against his shoulder 100 ordinary nights, who knew the sound of his key in my door, who'd spent 18 months collecting proof this man was different. That version argued, quiet under the anger, that a folder wasn't a full conversation. That handwriting in a margin could mean 100 things I hadn't considered. That I owed the last year of my life the dignity of hearing him out. A colder version was already doing the math. 4 days of silence. 4 days he could have called, warned me, protected me from walking into that room, believing I was celebrating something real. He'd had 4 days. He'd chosen all of them. I thought about every version of the conversation that could follow if I picked up. Him explaining, apologizing, telling me it wasn't what it looked like, and some small, exhausted part of me still wanting so badly to believe whatever he said next. That part of me was exactly how I'd ended up in that folder in the first place. Half hoping it would turn out to be nothing, I let it ring out. It rang 4 times, 5. I watched it the way you watch a fire you're not ready to put out yet, because some part of you isn't finished being angry that it started. On the 6th ring, it stopped. A few seconds later, a text. I need to see you. Not to explain. There's something you need to know before you hear it from someone else. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the work table next to the folder, next to 3 words in blue ink I already knew I'd never be able to unsee. Sat in the dark of my own shop a long time without moving. Whatever Beckett wanted to tell me now, it was already too late to be the thing that saved us, something you need to know before you hear it from someone else. There was a 4th page I hadn't gotten to yet. I'd skimmed past it, too fixed on his handwriting to let it register. I picked the folder back up, a timeline. Someone in that law office had typed it up like a project schedule for a building, which I suppose, in this family's eyes, was exactly what it was. Phase 1, informal introduction, completed. Phase 2, public introduction, week of the Preservation Guild, Winter Gala. Phase 3, formal engagement announcement, spring. I read week of the Preservation Guild Winter Gala 3 times before the shape of it landed all the way. I didn't have the contract yet, but I'd already submitted a proposal to design that exact gala 2 weeks earlier. The biggest opportunity Thistle and Vine had ever chased. Randall Corrigan sat on the gala's host committee. I'd known that. I hadn't known his family planned to use the same night to introduce his son to someone else. I set the folder down on the work table, both hands flat on top of it, and sat with that for a long time before I trusted myself to move. Chapter 4, Vashti's Table. I laughed. Actually laughed. Alone in an empty shop, the sound surprising me more than anything else that week. There was something so precisely engineered about it. 2 weeks of proposals, late nights sketching arrangements, a drive to a wholesaler in Ohio just to confirm amaryllis would still bloom in December. All of it aimed at a room some law office had already promised to someone else. I had wanted that gala the way I hadn't wanted a job in years. Not for the money, though the money mattered, but because a win like that would put Thistle and Vine somewhere it had never stood before. And in a downtown office, men who'd never once asked my opinion about anything had already decided that same room belonged to a different woman entirely. I thought about calling the events coordinator right then, withdrawing my proposal before I could be humiliated twice in one season. I got as far as opening my phone before I stopped myself. Whatever Randall Corrigan had planned for that gala, I'd been building toward it for reasons that had nothing to do with his family. I wasn't handing him that too. I set the folder down and didn't touch it again for 2 days. Sunday dinner at my mother's had been a fixed point in my week since before Beckett, before any of this. I almost cancelled out of sheer exhaustion. Went anyway, because letting this thing take Sunday dinner too would mean it had taken more than it deserved. The house on Bedford Avenue still had the green shutters from when I was 10. The porch swing. My father bolted into the beams the summer before he died, still holding, still creaking in the same register I remembered. 34 years my mother had lived there, the last 13 alone, raising me on what a seamstress makes altering other women's wedding gowns. Every time I climbed those steps, something in my chest unclenched, the relief of a place that never once asked me to be anyone other than who I already was. She made stuffed peppers, the recipe older than my ability to reach the stove. And the smell hit me before I even got my coat off. Nessa came too, the way she always did. Nobody remembered a version of Sunday dinner without her at the table. "You look tired," my mother said, setting a plate down. Not a question. An offering, proof she'd been watching for it. Some. Not great. Better than the first night. That's how it goes a while. Better, then worse, then better, in an order that won't make sense until you're all the way through it. Nessa reached under the table and squeezed my hand. The same gesture she'd been giving me since middle school. She'd covered the shop 3 days without complaint. Fielded 2 calls from Beckett she hadn't mentioned until I asked. Done everything a person could do to hold a door open without pushing me through it. "I heard something today," she said, halfway through dinner, careful in the way she got when she wasn't sure a thing should be said at all. "About Chip." I looked up. "Marisa at the flower market. Her cousin does books for the country club on the East End. Chip's wife left him back in August. Took their son. Some kind of gambling thing. Money missing from an account that wasn't supposed to have anything missing from it. The club quietly asked him to step back from a committee he'd sat on for years." She turned her water glass slowly. I'm not telling you this so you feel sorry for him. I'm telling you because it explains something. That toast wasn't really about you. Man watching Beckett have something whole while his own life falls apart behind closed doors. That's not a joke. That's a wound wearing a joke as a costume. I sat with it a long moment. Didn't make what he'd said land any softer. But it shifted how I understood that room. The way understanding a storm's cause doesn't stop the flood, but changes how you think about rebuilding after. Doesn't explain Beckett, I said. No, Nessa agreed. It doesn't. She was quiet a second, turning her fork over. You know I never liked him for you, not at first. It took me 4 months to come around. I want you to know I came around for real, Addie. Whatever happens now, that part wasn't me being polite. I know, I said, and meant it. That's part of what makes this so hard. Everyone was right to come around. That's what makes the ending feel like such a waste. She let it rest after that. Refilled my glass, steered us toward easier things. A spring wedding she was coordinating. A leak in her landlord's blind spot. And I was grateful for it. The particular gratitude you feel toward anyone who knows when a heart needs a break from its own weather. My mother didn't say much through the rest of dinner, but I caught her watching me the way she had all through my childhood, whenever she suspected I was carrying something I hadn't fully unpacked. When Nessa went to the bathroom, she leaned across the table. Whatever that folder said, you don't have to decide tonight what it means for the rest of your life. How did you do it? I asked. After Daddy, how did you decide anything that first year? She turned her fork over on the plate. I didn't decide much of anything for a long time. I just kept doing the next true thing in front of me. Pay the mortgage, alter the dress, pick you up from school. Eventually all those next true things added up to a life again, and I looked up one day and realized I'd built it without ever deciding to. She tucked a curl behind my ear, the way she had since I was small. You went to work. You came to dinner. That's the whole beginning, Adeline. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like standing still. Standing still on your own 2 feet is still standing, baby. Don't let anybody, including yourself, tell you different. I drove back to Thistle and Vine after dinner instead of home, telling myself I needed to check the ranunculus. The truth was simpler. The shop was the only place lately where my hands and my head agreed on what to do next. I spent an hour restocking the cooler in the quiet, radio low, the good kind of tired settling into my shoulders. I built this room from nothing 4 years ago. A lease I could barely afford, a second-hand cooler bought off a closing restaurant, buckets scavenged from a hardware store clearance rack. Nobody handed me any of it. I remembered the winter I couldn't afford heat in the back room, and worked in a coat for 6 weeks rather than close early. I remembered the first wedding that paid enough to cover a month's rent in a single check, how I'd sat on the floor of this exact room and cried from relief instead of grief for once. I ran my hand along the work table, scarred from years of shears and wire cutters, and felt something steady under my ribs that had nothing to do with Beckett Corrigan at all. I was still there past 9 when the bell over the door chimed. I knew before I turned around. I'd learned the weight of his footsteps 18 months ago, and some part of me hadn't forgotten it. Even now, Beckett stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, looking like a man who hadn't slept properly since the night I walked out of the foundry room, hands empty at his sides, like a man who'd finally run out of ways to wait. Chapter 5. The studio door. Neither of us said anything for a second. He stood in the doorway, the bell still swinging on its hook. I stood behind the work table, a fistful of ranunculus stems still in my hand. The whole shop seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who'd speak first. I set the stems down slowly, gave myself the extra second. I'd learned a long time ago, the first thing you say in a moment like this sets the tone for everything after, and I wasn't handing him an easy one. He looked thinner than 3 weeks should account for. I noticed it and hated that I noticed it, hated that some part of me still catalogued the details of his face like they were mine to keep track of. You shouldn't be here. I know. He stayed put, hands jammed in his coat pockets, like some part of him understood that crossing my threshold uninvited would cost him whatever ground he had left. Rain had gotten into his hair on the walk from his car, dark spots on his shoulders he hadn't bothered to brush off. I called. You didn't answer. I texted. Nothing. I wasn't going to just disappear and let you think I didn't what? Care. I picked the stems back up, needed something to do with my hands. You cared plenty, Beckett. Enough to sign your name in the margin of a legal document telling your father you'd handle me before Friday. His face went white. Not surprised white, caught white. You found it. I found it in a folder that ended up in my tote bag by accident. Was I supposed to find it eventually, or was that never the plan? That document is my father's doing, not mine. I didn't ask for any of it, but you knew about it. 4 days before I walked into that room thinking I was celebrating the happiest night of my life, you knew your father wanted this handled. Your word, handled, like I'm a line item instead of a person you were supposed to marry. I was trying to figure out how to fight him. Real desperation in it now, the kind that used to undo me instantly and now just sat in the room like a stranger. You don't know what it's like growing up with a father who treats every decision like a threat to what he built. I've been fighting him about this since the day I proposed. I thought I could handle it quietly, keep you out of it entirely. You didn't keep me out of anything. You let Chip make a joke about strays in front of 60 people, then told me to pay and leave when I finally said something back. That's not protecting me from your father's ugliness, Beckett. That's you deciding his approval mattered more than my dignity in real time. With witnesses, he flinched like I'd struck him. Good. I wanted him to feel the size of it, because for 4 days I'd felt nothing else. I panicked, he said. Saw my father's face and panicked and said the worst possible thing, and I have replayed that sentence every hour since. I know what it cost you. It's not costing you everything. It's costing you a business deal your father wants. Those aren't the same thing, and I need you to hear the difference because I don't think you fully do yet. There's a woman, he said finally low. The Ashcombe family. My father's been circling a partnership with them over a year, and somewhere along the way decided the fastest way to close it was through me. I told him no the day he first brought it up, months before I ever proposed to you. Thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. There's a timeline in that folder with a date on it. Week of the Preservation Guild Gala. The same gala I've spent 2 weeks chasing, Beckett. Something shifted in his face. Fresh horror, real this time. I didn't know that was your gala. I swear to you. Would it have mattered if you had? Of course it. Then why didn't it matter 4 days before the party, when you knew exactly what your father wanted and said nothing to me at all? He didn't have an answer. His jaw worked once, twice, the muscle jumping the way it did when he was holding something back. What about your mother? I asked. She was right there. Known me a year and a half. Did she say anything to you after I left? She was upset. Didn't say much. My mother doesn't fight my father in front of people. Never has. Then maybe that's the family pattern I should worry about. Not just his temper. Everyone around him learning to go quiet exactly when it matters most to speak. He didn't argue with that. I almost regretted saying it. I didn't take it back. I built this shop with nothing, I said, quieter now, the heat gone, something steadier underneath it. No family money, no father's company waiting to hand itself to me. Every single thing in this room I earned with my own hands, one bad month after another bad month, until the good months finally outnumbered them. I know what I'm worth because I built the proof of it myself, brick by brick, with nobody's help. You don't know what you're worth yet. Not really. You've spent your whole life inside a family that measures you by what you can secure for them, and some part of you still believes that's the only worth that counts. Until you can stand in a room full of your father's people and choose the truth over his approval, I can't build anything with you. Not because I don't love you. Because loving you isn't the same as trusting you, and right now I don't. Tell me how to fix this. I can't. That's the whole point. If I have to tell you it isn't fixed, You have to want the truth more than you want his approval on your own, without me managing it for you." He stood there a long moment. Something in him gave slightly, not dramatically, just a small drop at the shoulders, a man absorbing a verdict he'd half known was coming. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He turned toward the door, stopped, hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, I told my father no again this morning. Before I came here, it might mean something eventually," I said. "It doesn't mean anything tonight." He nodded once and left. I locked the door, flipped the sign, stood at the window longer than I meant to, watching him cross the street. He didn't start the engine right away. Sat there in the dark, both hands on the wheel, for nearly 10 minutes, while I stood on the other side of the glass with the lights off, watching a man I'd loved for a year and a half absorb his first real consequence without his family standing between him and it. A truck passed between us once, headlights sweeping the windshield, and for a second I lost sight of him entirely. When it cleared, he still hadn't moved. When he finally drove away, my face was wet. I let the tears come, standing alone in everything I'd built, because for the first time since the party, they felt like something other than grief. They felt like relief. Chapter 6, Mount Washington. My phone buzzed on the work table. For one full second before I looked, I let myself hope it was him, a text. Brief, businesslike. He'd moved his things out of my apartment while I was at the shop, left the key on the counter, wouldn't come by again unless I asked. 3 weeks of silence broken by 12 careful words. I set the phone face down and went back to the roses in front of me, hands steadier than I expected. First time since the party his actions matched what he'd said he wanted to become, thistle and vine. Meanwhile, was having the strangest month of its 4-year life. Word travels in this city. I don't know exactly how, but it travels. A woman who'd been at the party, an acquaintance of Josephine's, not someone I knew well, called to book me for her daughter's baby shower. Mentioned almost in passing that half the room had spent a week talking about the florist who stood up to the Corrigans. I hadn't wanted that kind of attention. 3 new consultations came in that same week anyway. By month's end, I'd booked more work than any single month since I opened. Nessa started keeping a small notebook by the register, tracking every new client and where they'd heard about us. And by the 3rd week, she'd stopped bothering to write "the party" in the margin, because it had become the answer often enough not to need writing down. I told her I didn't love being famous for a night I'd rather forget. She told me I wasn't famous for the night. I was famous for what I did after it, which was an entirely different thing, and one worth being proud of, than the call I'd been waiting for since September. "You're one of 2 finalists for the Guild Gala." The event's coordinator's voice was bright enough to make my stomach drop and soar at once. "Final decision 1st week of December. I'll be honest, Ms. Redmond, your portfolio's extraordinary. This one's yours to lose." I hung up and sat very still, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Hope that had nothing to do with Beckett Corrigan. I called my mother first. Then Nessa, who screamed loud enough I had to hold the phone away from my ear and insisted on closing early to split a bottle of wine on my apartment floor like we were 22 again. I let myself have that whole night, without checking it against anything Beckett might think or feel. I threw myself into the proposal with a focus I hadn't had for anything in years. Sketched a dozen versions before finding the one that felt right. Amaryllis and white pine and rosemary for remembrance, deep winter color against pale stone. Drove to a grower in Ohio twice to confirm the amaryllis would hold. Redid my cost estimate 3 times until it was tight enough to win without shorting myself a single stem. The Guild held a fall. Mixer at a restored Victorian in Shadyside. The Aldermont House, open to vendors and members. I went mostly because Nessa insisted a woman 2 events out from the biggest contract of her career needed to be seen shaking the right hands. Wore navy instead of green. Green belonged to a different night. The house was full of exactly the kind of small talk I'd built a career tolerating gracefully. Women asking where I'd trained. Men asking if flowers were a hobby that had simply gotten out of hand. I answered all of it with the same patient warmth I'd used for 11 years. And by 9 o'clock, my face ached from smiling at people who would forget my name by morning. I found Chip on the side terrace a little after 9, alone, a glass of something amber in his hand that wasn't his first. I almost turned around. Something about the way he was standing, shoulders folded in, staring at nothing. None of the loud performance from the foundry room. Stop me. Didn't expect to see you here, he said. Didn't expect to be seen. I can go. No, stay. I'm terrible company, but I'd rather be terrible with a witness than alone with this view. He gestured at the terrace. The city lights below, though we both understood he wasn't talking about the view. I stayed. I don't fully know why. Maybe I needed to see him without an audience of 60 people egging him on. Find out if there was a real person under the performance. Marissa said your wife left, I said, careful. I'm sorry. I mean that, his jaw tightened. August took our son. Money missing from an account I'd told her didn't exist. I'd been telling myself it was temporary, something I'd fix before anyone noticed. Everyone noticed. Club asked me to step down from the membership committee 2 weeks before your party. Very polite about it. A phone call from a man I'd known 20 years, telling me it might be best if I took some time. That's not an excuse for what you said to me. I know it isn't. He turned the glass, not drinking it. I've thought about that toast every day since. I had a bad month wearing a tuxedo and took it out on the one person in that room who hadn't done anything to deserve it. He looked at me, something raw in his face. Beckett called me that afternoon before the party. Told me to keep it light that night, keep the mood easy, because his old man was already circling, and he didn't want tension showing. Thought it was a favor to you. I took keep it light and turned it into something ugly, because ugly was the only key I had left that week. Something cold moved through my chest. Hearing it confirmed in Chip's own voice. Exactly what I'd suspected, reading that folder alone in my shop. Beckett had known the room would be tense. Tried to manage it instead of warning me. Papered over his father's pressure with a friend's jokes instead of one honest conversation. He knew, I said quietly. Knew something was coming and told you to make it funny instead of telling me the truth. For what it's worth, he's barely spoken to me since. His old man's given him an ultimatum. Word around the club is Randall wants the Ashcombe thing locked by the Guild Gala, or he's stripping Beckett's partnership down to nothing, demoting his own son in a company his grandfather built. The city lights blurred slightly. I realized I was gripping the railing harder than I needed to. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're up against. And because I owe you a truth after everything else I gave you that night was a lie, wearing a tuxedo. He looked out at the skyline, something hollowed out in his face. For what it's worth, the real worth, not the party kind. I hope he figures it out before it's too late for both of you. I didn't figure mine out in time. I left the mixer 20 minutes later without shaking another hand, my head too full to perform charm. Sat in my car in the gravel lot a long time before I trusted myself to drive, turning over one sentence until it settled into something sharp and unmistakable. The gala I'd spent months fighting for wasn't just my biggest professional chance anymore. It was the exact night Randall Corrigan intended to end, once and for all, any chance Beckett and I found our way back to each other. Let him have his date on the calendar. I was going to have my flowers in that conservatory, whether his plans survived the evening or not. Chapter 7, 6 weeks. I got the call on a Tuesday, elbow deep in a bucket of eucalyptus. Had to set the phone on speaker because my hands were too full to hold it, which meant Nessa heard the news the same second I did. Ms. Redmond, congratulations. The committee voted unanimously. Thistle and Vine has the gala. Nessa screamed before I could form a sentence. A customer at the cooler jumped, laughed, asked what was happening. I stood there gripping the counter with eucalyptus sap on my fingers, saying thank you so much over and over. Because it was the only sentence I could locate. I called my mother from the walk-in 5 minutes later, the only quiet corner in the shop. Silent on the line a second before her voice came through thick. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope you know that every single day, not just the ones where something this big happens, you did this, she said. Not the Corrigans, not anybody's family name opening a door for you. You with your own two hands, one bad month at a time until the good ones caught up. I promised her I'd sit with that, longer than I usually let myself sit with good news. When I came out of the cooler, Nessa had already opened a bottle of sparkling cider she kept in back for exactly this, and we toasted with paper cups in the middle of a workday, laughing until the two customers, browsing the coolers, asked what we were celebrating, and ended up raising their own cups too, strangers cheering. A win that belonged only to us. I stood in that cooler until my arms went properly cold, letting the truth of it settle instead of rushing past it into the next task on the list. The 6 weeks that followed were the busiest of my professional life. Sourced amaryllis and white pine from 3 growers to guarantee supply. Mocked up the whole conservatory layout on butcher paper taped across my work table, moving cutout arrangements around like a general planning a campaign, until Nessa started calling it the war room, and the name stuck. Hired 2 part-time hands to help process the volume. Trained them myself the same patient way Nessa had trained under me, one of them, a college student named Priya, studying horticulture at Pitt. Asked why I was so particular about how we wired the pine boughs. Made her redo a section 3 times until the needles fell exactly right. Because somebody's going to stand under that archway on the worst or best night of their life, I told her, and they won't remember a single stem, but they'll remember how the whole thing made them feel. That's the only thing we're actually selling. She wrote it down in a little notebook she carried everywhere. Watching her take it seriously enough to keep reminded me why I'd started this shop in the first place. Long before any of it had anything to do with Beckett Corrigan, there were bad nights too. In those 6 weeks, nights I don't romanticize just because the ending turned out well. A supplier in Ohio nearly cancelled my amaryllis order 2 weeks out, and I drove 4 hours round trip on a Tuesday to stand in his greenhouse and make sure the flowers I'd promised the guild actually existed. I broke a vase of eucalyptus at 11 at night and sat on the floor of my own shop for 10 full minutes before I could make myself sweep it up. Building something worth having was never just the parts that photograph well. I saw him twice in those 6 weeks, both from a distance, both close enough to notice the change even across a street. He'd lost weight he didn't have to spare, wore his coat like a man who'd forgotten to check the weather. Once outside a coffee shop on Butler Street, he stopped mid-stride when he saw me through the window. Neither of us moved for a second. Then he nodded once and kept walking, like he'd promised himself he wouldn't crowd whatever space I'd asked for, even when the asking cost him something visible. I heard, through Nessa, through the same grapevine that carried everything in this city eventually, that he'd started spending less time at Corrigan Development's downtown offices and more at a small firm space he'd rented in Lawrenceville, a few blocks from my own shop, doing consulting under his own name instead of his father's. I didn't know what to make of that. Told myself it wasn't my business to make anything of it at all. Some stubborn corner of my heart kept turning it over anyway. My mother came by the shop the Sunday before the gala, ostensibly to see the finished mock-ups, though I suspected the real reason was checking on me with her own eyes. "You look tired," she said, studying the butcher paper covered in taped sketches. "Good tired. The kind that means something's actually being built." She touched one, a cascading arrangement for the conservatory's main archway. "This is beautiful, Adeline. Whatever happens Thursday night with anything else, this alone is something to be proud of." Wednesday night. The night before, I was alone in the shop past 10, doing final counts on ribbon and wire when the bell chimed. I knew before I turned around. "I know I shouldn't be here tonight of all nights," Beckett said, hands visible and empty at his sides, not stepping closer. "But there's something you need to know before tomorrow. About my father. What he's planning for the gala. I have to tell you before you walk in blind." I looked at him a long moment, the exhaustion carved into his face, the small, desperate hope still visible underneath. "Not tonight. I have flowers to finish, and a room to win tomorrow on my own 2 feet. I can't do that carrying whatever you came here to hand me. Whatever it is, it'll keep. Addie, it's important. I know it's important. That's exactly why it has to wait. Save it for the one night I actually have room to hear it. What if tomorrow's too late? Too late for what? He shook his head. Some private calculation behind his eyes he didn't let me see the shape of. Nothing. Forget I said that. Tomorrow, then. I'll wait. There was something in the way he said it, quiet and resigned, that made me want to pull the thread and see what unraveled. I made myself hold still instead. 6 weeks building something entirely my own, and I wasn't handing the night before it opened over to anyone's unfinished sentence. Not even his. He reached into his coat, set something small on the counter by the door, a folded piece of paper, nothing else, and left without another word. I didn't touch it. Finished my ribbon count, turned off the lights, locked the shop for the night, the paper still sitting untouched on the counter, waiting for a tomorrow I wasn't sure yet I was ready to face. Chapter 8. The Winter Garden. I read the note at 6 in the morning, coffee going cold at my kitchen table. Told myself I'd face it before the day got its hands on me, instead of during, when I wouldn't have the luxury of falling apart in private, if it came to that. His handwriting. Shorter than I expected. My father's introducing me to Delaney Ashcombe tonight, in front of people, treating it like it's already decided. I'm not going to let it be decided. Don't know yet what that costs me. But I needed you to know before you walked into that room and saw it happening without any warning. Whatever else you think of me, I didn't want you blindsided twice. I read it 3 times, folded it back along its creases, tucked it in my coat pocket, where I could feel its weight through the wool, and went to work. Because 6 weeks of building something couldn't wait, on whatever Randall Corrigan had planned for the evening. Phipp's conservatory in December looked like a memory I hadn't made yet. Glass ceilings arched overhead, fogged faintly at the edges from the cold outside, and under them a whole winter garden built of light, thousands of small bulbs threaded through the permanent plantings. Poinsettias banked deep red along the walkways. Into all of that, my team and I built our own additions. Cascading amaryllis and white pine at the entrance archway. Rosemary and cedar garlands along the palm court's iron railings. One dramatic installation suspended above the reception hall that Priya and I had wired for 6 straight hours the day before. Both of us up on ladders until our arms shook. By 7, when the doors opened, I stood near the palm court entrance in Hellebore Green, watching 400 of Pittsburgh's most influential people walk beneath an archway I'd built with my own hands. More than one of them stopped mid-conversation to look up. Ms. Redmond, a preservation board member I recognized from the society pages, took both my hands in hers. This is extraordinary. I've been to a dozen galas in this room. I've never seen it look like this. You'll be hearing from us again. I thanked her and meant it. Let the wind land fully, because whatever happened later with the Corrigans, I'd promised myself I wouldn't let it steal this part. This part belonged entirely to me. A caterer I'd worked with a dozen times over the years grabbed my elbow near the kitchen doors, grinning. You've officially ruined every other gala for the rest of us. Nobody's going to want plain centerpieces after tonight. I laughed, real laughter. The first easy sound I'd made in weeks that had nothing to do with anyone but myself. An older trustee found me a few minutes later, gray-haired, the quiet authority of a man who'd spent decades being listened to without raising his voice. I remember when this conservatory was falling apart in the 80s, he said, looking up at the garland. Nobody thought it was worth saving. Somebody finally decided it was. Look at it now. He turned to me. You have that same instinct, young lady. Seeing what's worth building before anyone else agrees with you. Don't lose it. I carried that sentence longer than anything Randall Corrigan had planned for the evening. I saw Beckett across the palm court a little after 8, near his mother, his collar too tight the way a man's collar gets when he spent the whole night resisting the urge to loosen it. He saw me too. Didn't cross the room, didn't try to catch my eye twice. Something in my chest loosened at that anyway. Grateful for space, given without being asked, Randall made his move closer to 9 when the crowd had thickened enough to guarantee an audience. I was 20 feet away, arranging a fallen stem back into a garland, close enough to hear every word. Beckett. Randall's warmth was the kind reserved for moments he wanted witnessed. "There's someone I've been wanting you to meet properly." He gestured to a man and a young woman, Bradford Ashcombe, introductions told me, and his daughter Delaney, poised in ivory silk, primed for exactly this moment, the same way I'd once been primed for evenings just like it. Delaney's been following the Riverfront project with real interest. Told her firm's president there wasn't a better mind in this city to walk her through it than my own son, staged. Scaffolding built around a decision already poured in concrete weeks ago in a law office. Delaney held out her hand with the practiced ease of a woman who'd done this exact dance before, at some other family's convenience, and something in her polite, careful smile looked exactly like fatigue, the particular tiredness of a woman who suspected she was a chess piece and had decided, for tonight, to play along anyway. "Dad!" Beckett's voice carried further than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as far as he meant it to. "I need to say something. I'd rather say it now in front of people than keep letting you stage these conversations where I'm too outnumbered to say it properly." Randall's smile didn't move. Something behind his eyes went sharp and cold. "Beckett, I'm not marrying into a merger. Not walking Delaney through the Riverfront project tonight or any other night. Not because there's anything wrong with her, but because there's everything wrong with treating my marriage like a line in a shareholder agreement. You tried this once already. It cost me the best thing in my life, and I let it happen because I was more afraid of you than I was in love with honesty. I'm done being afraid of you in front of an audience." The palm court went quiet the particular way a room goes quiet when it realizes it's watching something real instead of performance. Josephine's hand rose toward her throat. Delaney stepped back half a step. "You're embarrassing yourself," Randall said. "Low now, the warmth gone?" "No, I embarrassed myself in October, in a room I decorated for my own engagement party, when I told the woman I loved to pay and leave because I was more worried about your approval than her dignity. I'm not compounding that one more night because you've decided the timeline works better for you this way." He turned, found me across the room, said something to me in front of witnesses instead of around me for the first time since the foundry room. "Addie, I don't get to ask you for anything tonight. I'm not asking. I just needed you to hear this from me, in a room, the way I should have defended you in the first place, instead of asking you to pay for a bill that was never yours to owe." Every eye in the palm court found me. I felt the full weight of it. 400 people watching to see what I'd do with what he'd just handed me. Standing there in a dress the color of new growth. I had exactly one chance to answer this the way I actually meant it, not the way the room wanted a fairy tale to end. "Thank you for saying that," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "I mean it. It took courage here tonight in front of your father." I let the room hold its breath a second longer. "But I needed this in October, Beckett. Not tonight, in a room full of witnesses who'll go home and call it romantic. I needed one honest sentence the night it actually mattered, and I didn't get it. I won't build anything on an apology that only shows up with an audience to perform for. If this is real, it'll still be real next week with no one watching. Prove it to me there. Not here." I didn't wait for an answer. Turned, walked back through the palm court entrance, past the archway I'd built out into the cold December night. Didn't look back to see his face. For once, I didn't need to know what it looked like to know I'd told the truth. Behind me, faintly, through the glass walls, Randall's voice rose, sharp and furious. "You just threw away everything I built for this family in front of 400 people. Beckett's answer, quieter, carrying further than his father's. "No, I finally stopped letting you build it on top of someone else." A pause. Then Randall's voice again, lower, rougher, something underneath the anger cracking open despite himself. "You think I don't know what it costs? You think I haven't paid for this family every single day for 30 years? I didn't stay to hear if Beckett had an answer. Kept walking out into the cold, carrying a sentence I didn't understand yet, but wouldn't be able to put down. Chapter 9. The Letter. January in Pittsburgh arrives grey and stays that way, rivers running the colour of pewter under a sky that seems to have forgotten what sun looks like. Thistle and Vine had never been busier. The gala photographs ran in the Post-Gazette style section. My archway installation featured with a caption that used the word visionary in a sentence about me. I read it 4 times before I believed it applied to my own name. Bookings poured in all month. 2 weddings for the following autumn, a downtown law firm's monthly account, a boutique hotel in Shadyside asking about permanent installations. I hired Priya full-time. I built all of that myself. Nobody's family name opened that door. Nobody's rescue money smoothed the way. Stem by stem, same as everything else in my life that mattered. And if the Corrigan name ever touched any of it, it was only ever as the thing I'd had to survive. My mother framed the newspaper clipping, hung it in her hallway next to a photo of my father. Nessa got promoted, in her own words, from best friend who works here to actual co-owner, a title I made official on paper because 4 years of her showing up before I even asked deserved more than a job description could hold. I saw Beckett twice that month, both times by accident, both times close enough to draw my own conclusions instead of borrowing anyone else's. The first was a delivery run that took me past his storefront. His door was propped open despite the cold. Through it, I could hear him talking with an older woman I didn't recognize. Grey-haired, a cane hooked over the back of her chair, papers spread across his drafting table. Mrs. Doyle, the assessment's the same work whether I bill for it or not, he was saying. Your porch has real bones under that rot. I'm not charging you full rate to tell you something worth saving is worth saving. She said something back I couldn't hear. He laughed, an easy, unguarded sound I remembered from 100 ordinary nights before any of this. I'd rather spend my life putting things back together. You're not the exception. You're the whole reason I do this. He'd said something close to that the first day I met him, standing at my counter 18 months ago. Hearing him hand it to a stranger for free, with no one there to see it land, told me something no letter could have. I kept walking before he saw me. That was the point. The second time was a Lawrenceville community meeting, arguing for a permit variance so Thistle and Vine could put a small awning over our entrance before winter's ice. Beckett was there too, a few rows back, for a different item. A developer pushing to demolish a row of townhouses his own firm had once fought to save. When the developer's lawyer mentioned that a Corrigan-affiliated study once supported this kind of teardown, Beckett's hand went up. That study's 11 years old and it's not mine, he said, not glancing once toward the name being used on his behalf. I've spent 2 months restoring one of those exact townhouses with my own hands. They're worth saving, whether my last name means anything in this room or not. He sat back down, without asking anyone to thank him for it. Nobody in that room but me understood how easily he could have let the Corrigan name carry the argument instead of his own 2 hands. He hadn't reached for it. Josephine came into the shop the 2nd week of January, unannounced, coat too warm for the mild afternoon, standing just inside the door, the way people stand when they're not entirely sure they're welcome. I won't take much of your time, she said. I wanted to see the shop that made 400 people stop talking at once. And I wanted to tell you in person that I should have said something the night of the party. I've regretted my silence every day since. I'm not asking you for anything by telling you that. I just needed you to hear it from me directly. Can I ask you something? Why now? The gala was weeks ago. She considered it like she'd been waiting for someone to ask properly. Because I needed to know if I meant it, or if it was shame-talking, the kind that fades once the room empties. I gave it time on purpose. I'm still here. That means something. I hesitated, then asked the question I'd been carrying since the gala, since Randall's voice cracked on something underneath the fury as I walked out. Your husband said something that night about paying for this family every day for 30 years. I've wondered what he meant. Josephine went quiet, long enough I thought she might not answer. Then she sat unasked in the chair by my work table and folded her hands the way a woman does when she's decided to finally tell a story she's kept a long time. Randall's father lost almost everything in 1983, she said. A partner he trusted on a handshake walked away the moment the steel market turned, took enough capital with him that the company nearly didn't survive the year. Randall was 26. Watched his father age 10 years in one, watched him sell things he loved to keep the rest standing. Swore at his father's kitchen table he'd never again let something as fragile as trust hold up everything his family built. So he built contracts instead, I said slowly. Trusts, alliances, a whole life that way, including, if I'm honest, his marriage to me. She said it plainly without flinching. My family had capital his father needed. It took years to become something real between us, but it did eventually. And Randall spent every day since believing that's simply how a lasting thing gets built. With structure, never with the kind of reckless faith you and Beckett had from the very first month. She looked at me directly. When Beckett chose you with no hedge at all, some part of my husband couldn't survive watching it succeed. If you two could have both love and safety without any of the architecture he built his whole life around, it would mean his guardedness was never necessary at all. He wasn't protecting the business that night. He was protecting the only story he's ever let himself believe about his own life. I sat with that a long moment, didn't make what Randall had done acceptable. A wound explained is still a wound. Understanding where a blade came from doesn't dull its edge. But something in me loosened anyway, some tight, angry place I hadn't realized I was still holding. A man with a real reason, however poor a reason, was easier to finally set down than a man I'd have had to keep calling simply cruel. Has he said any of that to Beckett? No. Her face tightened. He hasn't spoken more than a dozen words to our son since the gala. I don't know if he ever will. Not really. That's its own grief, separate from anything between you two. I've made my peace with not being able to fix that one for either of them. She bought a small arrangement of winter greenery on her way out, paid full price despite my offer of a discount, left without asking a single question about her son. The letter came on a Thursday, slipped through the mail slot rather than mailed. No stamp, no address, just my name in handwriting I'd know anywhere. I made myself wait until closing to open it. Learned that much, at least in 3 months, that I got to choose when I received things instead of letting them arrive on someone else's schedule. Addie, I'm not writing this to ask you for anything. I want that clear before you read another word. Because I know how many times these last few months you've had to brace yourself for exactly that kind of ask. And I don't want to be one more person who made you brace. I left the company. Not because my father took it. I left before he could because staying meant staying inside a version of myself I'm done being. Building something small now on my own name. First work I've done in my adult life, where I can't blame anyone else if it fails. And somehow, that's the most peace I've felt in years. I think about the foundry room more than anything else. Not the toast. Not my father's face. You standing up, telling a room full of people who didn't deserve to hear it, that you'd built yourself with your own 2 hands. I've spent every day since trying to become a man who would have stood up first, before you ever had to. I'm not asking you to answer this. I just wanted the truth on paper, in my own handwriting, where you could keep it or throw it away, whichever one you need it to be. Beckett, I read it 3 times. Sitting alone at my work table, shop lights dimmed. January dark pressed against the front window. Folded it along its creases, set it beside the folder from 3 months earlier. 2 pieces of paper from the same man that could not have said more different things. I called my mother before I let myself decide anything, read her the letter slowly. She was quiet on the other end until I finished. He wrote that himself. No lawyer's handwriting talking about handling anybody this time? No, I agreed. Just him. I told you once already, you don't owe anybody an answer just because they're finally ready to ask the right question. But a man who writes you the truth and asks for nothing back is not the same man who signed his name next to Handle before Friday. Don't mistake your own caution for an answer you haven't actually reached yet. I thanked her. Sat a while longer after we hung up, the letter open under the low light. The memory of Mrs. Doyle's porch and a townhouse study he hadn't reached for sitting right alongside it. When I finally stood, I didn't second-guess it the way I might have a week earlier. Reached for my coat, then my keys, sitting in the little dish by the register where they'd sat every night since I opened this shop. Closed my hand around them the same way I had the night I walked out of the foundry room. This time, they weren't taking me away from anything. I had somewhere I wanted to go. Chapter 10, Slow Bloom. The storefront was easy to find. Nessa had mentioned the block once in passing, and I'd filed it away without admitting to myself why. Small. A single room. A hand-lettered sign in the window that just said Corrigan Preservation Consulting. No gold lettering, no receptionist. A drafting table stacked with rolled blueprints and a coffee mug gone cold beside them. Nothing like the marble lobby downtown. It looked like a shop. It looked with a small ache in my chest. A little like mine. He was still there at 9, bent over the table, looked up when the bell chimed, the same kind of bell I had over my own door, and stared at me a second, like he wasn't sure whether to trust what he was seeing. Addie, I read your letter 3 times. I meant every word. Still do. He straightened slowly, kept the table between us careful, the way he'd been careful every time since October. I'm not going to ask what you decided. Promised myself I wouldn't. I know you won't. That's part of why I'm here. I looked around the small office, at the blueprints, at a single framed photograph on the wall, the row of Lawrenceville townhouses where we'd first met. Finished now, lit warm in the evening light. You did that? Finished it myself, after I left the company. Not for my father this time, because I wanted to see it through. He followed my gaze, something easing in his shoulders. First thing I've ever built that's only mine. Strange thing to feel proud of after 34 years of building things for someone else's approval. I sat down slowly in the single chair across from his table, the closest thing to a place for visitors, and he stayed standing, giving me the space rather than crowding it. It was its own kind of answer before either of us had said much of anything. I'm not here to tell you everything's forgiven, I said. I want to be honest, because I promised myself a long time ago I'd never build something on a feeling I hadn't earned the right to feel yet. What happened at the foundry room isn't erased because you gave a good speech in a conservatory 2 months later. I don't expect it to be. But I've watched you 3 months now. Not from inside a relationship where it's easy to talk yourself into whatever you want to believe. From the outside, the way strangers watch people, which is a much harder place to fool anybody. I saw you waive your fee for an old woman on a porch who never asked you to. Sat 2 rows behind you at a zoning meeting and watched you refuse to let your own last name win an argument you could have won easier with it. You walked away from a partnership before your father could take it. Wrote me a letter that didn't ask for a single thing back. That's not a man performing change for an audience anymore. That's just who you're actually becoming, whether I'm watching or not. He was quiet a moment. Something moved across his face that looked almost like disbelief. A man who'd stopped letting himself hope for exactly this conversation somewhere around the 2nd week of January. So where does that leave us? Careful, like the question might break something if he asked it too fast. Slow, slower than before, if that's possible. No moving back in together. No picking up where we left off like the last 3 months didn't happen. I want dinners. Actual conversations. Time to see if the man in this small office is the same man on a Tuesday that he was in front of 400 people on a Thursday. I need to trust the ordinary version of you, not just the dramatic one. I can do slow. Relief cracked his voice. Didn't try to hide it. I'd take slow for the rest of my life if it meant getting this right. I stood. For a moment, neither of us moved toward the other, both understanding, I think, that whatever came next needed to be built the way everything worth having in my life had ever been built. Carefully, one true thing at a time, with nobody rushing toward an ending just because it would feel good to arrive. I reached into my coat pocket, where I'd tucked a single stem before I left the shop, on instinct, without fully deciding why. Not a rose, Not anything from the finished arrangements I sold to other people's celebrations. Just a sprig of rosemary, green and hardy. The kind of thing that roots easily in water on a windowsill and asks for almost nothing to keep growing. Not flowers, I said, setting it on the corner of his drafting table. Not yet. Just something that's already alive. The kind of green that means it's already started growing, before anyone can see what it's going to become. He looked at the sprig a long moment, then at me, something in his face settling into an expression I hadn't seen since the morning he brought me soup and sorted my invoices into piles while my fever broke. Back before either of us had reason to doubt each other. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. I promise you that. I believed him. Not the way I'd believed him in the foundry room, blind and unguarded, certain the floor would hold just because it always had before. A different kind of believing this time, earned one true thing at a time, the only kind that had ever actually lasted in my life. I left my keys in my coat pocket when I walked out. Didn't need to hold on to them tonight to remember what they meant. Outside, the January air was sharp again. The same cold that had stung my face on Smallman Street 3 months earlier, standing outside a room I'd just walked out of with my whole chest cracked open. This cold felt different. I stood on the sidewalk a moment, breathing it in, and looked back once through the glass, the way I had that first night. He was still standing at the drafting table, looking down at one small sprig of rosemary, like it was the most important thing anyone had ever set in front of him. I already knew. Beloved queen flowers, gather close tonight because this one is going to sit right in your chest. Addie Redmond built her whole life with her own 2 hands. A flower shop from nothing, a name people in her city finally learned to respect. Then, on the night her fiancé's family gathered to celebrate their engagement, his best friend stood up and made her the punchline of his own toast. And when she finally spoke up for herself, the man she loved looked her dead in the eye and told her to pay the bill and leave. So she did something better than cry. She stood up. She took her keys. And she walked out into the cold with her head high, not knowing that what she'd find in the weeks that followed would test everything she thought she knew about love, family, and her own worth. This is a story about a woman who refused to let anyone else write the ending to her life. It's about the quiet, patient work of rebuilding, not with anger, not with revenge, but with dignity. It's about a man who had to lose everything comfortable about his life before he could become someone worth trusting again. And it's about the difference between a love that only shows up when it's convenient and a love that finally learns to stand up first. Stay with Addie all the way to the end, Queen Flowers. What she builds is worth the wait. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a queen flower in your life who needs to hear tonight's message. You were never the help. You were always the whole garden. Thematic lessons. Before we part tonight, beloved queen flowers, let's bow our heads for just a moment. Lord, thank you for every woman watching who has ever been made to feel small in a room she built with her own hands. Remind her tonight of her worth. Amen. Now, here is what tonight's story leaves in our hearts. Your dignity was never a bill someone else gets to hand you. Addie gave her love freely, and when it was thrown back at her as a debt, she refused to pay it. Queen Flowers, whatever you have given from love, nobody has the right to turn it into a transaction later. Silence in the room that matters most is its own kind of betrayal. Beckett's failure wasn't only the words he said. It was the 4 days of silence before them. Love that stays quiet when you need it, loudest, isn't protecting you. Healing doesn't ask permission from the person who hurt you. Addie didn't wait for an apology to start building again. Her shop grew, her name grew, her whole life grew on its own timeline, answering to nobody. The people who wound us are still people, carrying wounds of their own. Chip's cruelty came from a heartbreak he never let anyone see. Understanding where pain comes from doesn't excuse it, but it can soften how tightly we carry it afterward. Real change is quiet, not performed, Beckett's grandest gesture wasn't his speech in front of 400 people. It was a one-room office, an honest letter, and a promise kept when nobody was watching. Slow is not the same as unsure. Addie didn't run back at the first good apology. She watched, she waited, she let time tell her the truth a single moment never could. That patience was not weakness. It was wisdom wearing its work clothes. Carry these with you this week, Queen Flowers. And remember, you were built to bloom with or without anyone else's permission. Until next time, stay blessed, stay beautiful, and stay exactly who you are, Mr. Peter.